Mike, what's up, man? It's good to see you. I see you're representing Black Rifle. I've got my Black Rifle hat on today too, so we're in good company with those guys.
Yeah, always. It's either BRCC or Fieldcraft. So
Good. Well, like you got to represent your own brand too, right? Like it's good to help friends, but you got to promote what you're doing as well. So I admire what you guys are doing with Fieldcraft as well. You guys are doing incredible things, and it's much needed in society. That's for sure.
yeah, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, we're doing our best. I think it's an everyday grind for us, but it's all good problems to have.
Yeah, one of the things I admire about what you're doing is I know we've played a little back and forth trying to get together, and Evan Hafer with Black Rifle introduced us, and of course I'm familiar with Jocko. He's been on the podcast, and Tim Kennedy and all these guys that you run around with. One of the things I was going to say I admire about what you're doing is you're putting your money where your mouth is. There's a lot of guys on there who are talking about how to be a good man and how to be a protector and how to do all these things we talk about doing. But I know you've been busy specifically in Afghanistan. Is that right? Is that kind of consumed you over the past, month or so now?
Yeah, man, it has. And it's sad to even say it out loud that I've been super disappointed day after day, even last night. I mean, it's such a difficult circumstance. And I'm on the board of advisors for Tim Kennedy and Chad Robichaw's organization called Saber Allies on saberallies.org. This organization has been doing real help. Like they caught some flack for it initially because people didn't understand what the actual organization was about. But yeah, it's been a constant struggle. Was going to go to Dubai last week. Was going to go to Tajikistan the week prior, but there's a whole bunch of hiccups along the way in trying to get Afghan and even American citizens out of Afghanistan. It's drama for sure, man.
Yeah, it's hard because what I see from the outside looking in is, I mean, just a big mess. That's the best way I can put it, and it doesn't do it justice, I'm sure. But I don't know what to believe. Like I see what you guys are doing and what Tim Kennedy is doing, and of course, because I know Tim personally, I admire and respect what you guys are trying to accomplish. And then there's the narrative that's being pushed, and then I think I saw a report the other day that said something like, I can't remember. I'm paraphrasing, but maybe it's Congress or there's some sort of intelligence agency that's actually doing an investigation on what Tim Kennedy is doing. It's wild. I just don't know what to believe anymore, and that's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, in a nutshell, man. I used to work for the CIA. Used to work in the military, and I have a really good grasp of how these things work. I've planned neo evacuations of non-combatant civilians in Africa in real world operations. I personally planned and was in charge of the neo evacuation for the American citizens in Mali. And so one of the big concerns is how this transpired with no responsibility to bear is going to create a trend and a pattern of continuing to make these same mistakes. So one of the things that happened, which kind of was the trigger for this, was the military was directed to hand over the neo evacuation to the State Department. And the State Department can't even plan a lunch banquet in a foreign country, let alone a neo evacuation of American citizens and Afghan partners in this case, which is a more complex military operation. So from the onset, it was leading up to a tipping point that catastrophically snowballed into everything that you're seeing today. And the biggest problem is when we pulled out and disconnected, we don't have immigration, we don't have a protocol, we don't have an embassy. And so all of the things that we normally would do diplomatically to get our guys out, even after the fact, which the State Department said we're going to continue to work with the Taliban to get our guys out. Right. That's not void now. And you're negotiating essentially with a terrorist organization. And a lot of the groups that have been able to get guys out have literally paid ransoms essentially to the Taliban to get guys out. And so I know the Department of Justice is investigating, just like they are domestic terrorism, where that's their number one focus, not Islamic terrorism we've been fighting for the last 20 years, but domestic terrorism. And they're looking into these nonprofits who, by all accounts, from my experiences in working with about 5 or 6 of them in the last 30 days have all been doing the right thing. Now, is there fraud, waste, and abuse? I'm sure. It's called bureaucracy, but I've seen only good things from the private sector trying to help Afghans get out. It's been a roller coaster ride for sure.
So let me make sure I wrap my head around this. What you're saying is that the Justice Department is coming after these private entities because they're quote unquote funding terrorism because they're paying to get civilians out. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, this is all hearsay, obviously. The hearsay is the DOJ, and this is somebody who was there with the government and during these meetings. The DOJ has put out that they're going to investigate specific nonprofits, 501c3s, that have collected money and given money to the Taliban, and including in a case in which $50 million was given to get, which was humanitarian aid, to get an airplane off the ground full of girls. Now, at this point, the private sector is doing everything they can possibly to make this happen, because the alternative is death, sex trafficking, hostage taking, obviously rape and murder. And so they're doing everything they can. And so I would say, if the government, which has negotiated from the onset, including giving them the outer perimeter, that allowed an ISIS-K member to come through during a suicide attack and kill 13 Americans, 13 service members, and 160 plus Afghans, they're negotiating with terrorists right now. And so for them to make this happen, and for the government to waste taxpayers' dollars to do these kind of federal investigations, one, I'm not surprised at this point based on what's happening in the government, but it's disappointing for sure.
Are you concerned? And I'm going to use this term just because I don't know. I mean, I take your word for it for sure because of who you run with and that reputation you have. But are you concerned about making these types of accusations, and how does that come back to you? Is there any sort of pushback on you or challenges that you might personally be dealing with?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and in full transparency, I'm already on the list. You know what I mean? Like, I'm already an HVT according to the federal government, likely. I mean, here, let me give you a snapshot of this. When I was a government contractor for the CIA, I was a direct hire, which means I worked directly for the Central Intelligence Agency. And so when I used to travel CONUS, because at the same time I was a sergeant major in 19th Group, when I used to travel CONUS in between flying between Texas, where I was stationed at, and anywhere else in the US, I would get flagged with I believe it's all zeros or all ones. There would be like 4 ones.
You're saying in privately, when you traveled privately, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, commercial, not
Got it.
No government business. But in one case, I was traveling to do an actual command and control staff briefing, and I had my military uniform with me. And I got this scanned. It happens when they check your ticket. They scan it, and it comes up with all ones or 10, all zeros. I can't remember. But they pull you into secondary. Now, getting pulled into secondary is a normal thing in a foreign country when foreign service officials or officers are trying to interrogate you. So TSA was pulling me and doing a secondary search, including a strip search, which I went through before, and secondary questioning. In one case, I had my suitcase with me. I opened it up, and my military uniform had it folded up nice and neat. And I had, and exposed was my unit insignia. So it said Special Forces tab, Ranger tab, Airborne tab, and then my unit insignia. And the guy who's I guess essentially interrogating me, he's like, "Hey, why do you have a military uniform?" And I went, you have my military ID card that says Sergeant Major E9 in your hand. Look at your hand. And then he looks at the hand. He goes, "Yeah, but where are you traveling to?" I'm traveling to go do drill for business. And then I'm like, "Dude, let me advise you on something. One, I got flagged into secondary. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency, and I work for the military. Where's your supervisor and boss? Bring him in here." So I brought him in, and this is probably the 6th or 7th time this happened. So this guy, we build rapport. He'd make some phone calls, and come to find out, because I was traveling overseas to Yemen, Pakistan, all these great tourism locations, they put me on a list. But because the two hands don't talk to each other, they had me flagged as being on a terrorist watch list. So the incompetency of the government in all ways. I mean, I've experienced this in Libya, in Benghazi. I experienced this in my military career. That's the thing. That's the kind of things you deal with. So in this case, I mean, when I started American Contingency, a organization that pulled American resources together in communities to be able to defend and protect themselves by leveraging networks, we went after as a white supremacist organization. Like literally a guy did an article from it's a leftist organization calling me a white supremacist. And I'm half Asian. I'm Asian American. And then he called me a alt-right, right-wing extremist. USA Today published that article, republished that article. And then I was told, because I have friends in the FBI, friends in all the federal organizations, because they're all tactical guys, I was told I was on the list. And I'm like, well, what do I have to do to get off the list? So a few interviews later, even CNN interviewed me because they wanted to elevate and amplify what they had heard, because they thought I was affiliated with Proud Boys. And it became this thing. And I'm like, I'm a patriot, but I'm also a centrist. I'm a libertarian. I don't care about affiliations with right parties and left parties. I care about independence, freedom, and not being bothered by the US government. Like, leave me the hell alone. Right. And that's still a thing. I mean, I deal with it. The Proud Boys came to visit me at Overland Expo because they heard I was in town. Visit me. I don't even know what that means. But, like, if you want to visit me, I have my address advertised for Fieldcraft Survival online. Like, come visit me. It's like, it's one or the other. It's like the government, it's the extremist, and it's constant. But that's like the nature of our world today. For a personality like me or Evan or Jocko, it's crazy.
When you say the Proud Boys wanted to visit you, what I'm interpreting that as that's a threat. Am I understanding that correctly? They're coming to intimidate or threaten you?
Well, so they approached my booth. I wasn't in the booth because I was meeting with somebody else, and they said they had heard that I had said the Proud Boys had made death threats against me. And I don't think I've ever said that. And TBI is a thing. I don't remember ever saying that. I got lots of threats from different people, not specifically the Proud Boys. And I don't care. Like, I'm not tracking the Proud Boys, just like I'm not tracking left-wing extremists. I don't care. Antifa doesn't matter to me. BLM, I'm doing my own thing. So I'm assuming they came to find out if I had said that and maybe clarify. I hope that it wasn't true, and trying to connect with me in person. But, again, me and Evan and a lot of personalities in these spaces who are vocal about these organizations are going to be attacked. It's just natural.
So you said that there's a level of government incompetency. You were saying one hand isn't talking to the other. Is that what it is? Or do you think it's more malicious than that? Is it just incompetence, or is it malicious in intent to shut people up, to get people to abide by these ideologies? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it is more than that. I think it's comprehensive, and I think it ties a lot to incentives and desires, emotions, and like you said, ideology. So how that manifests itself isn't very deliberate in its intent, but it doesn't have to be, because when you have an ideology and you're recruiting your administration and they have similar ideologies, then it's like a it's like a tsunami. It's going to have resounding effects outside of the center point of that start point. And so I do think a lot of it has to do with groups of people who think similarly. In this case, socialism or communist ties. There's no doubt the administration's in bed with China, because there's facts, there's evidence to prove that. So how that evolves and how that progresses and how that affects our culture and American citizens, results in a reflection of complacency, of bureaucracy, of corruption. And like I said, I've experienced that firsthand. I mean, when I was in Libya, I went to Libya. I deployed to Libya in October of 2011, right after Benghazi. Was that 12? That was 12. Right after Benghazi, and was part of the counterterrorism force. I was actually the team lead for the counterterrorism force that was building the counterterrorism unit to go after the guy who's responsible for killing the 4 Americans, 2 GRS guys, and Ambassador Stevens. And politically, because it wasn't the right political climate, we couldn't do our job. So we just lost an ambassador. We have the guy. We know where he's at. We could kill him right now or capture him right now, but you don't think the political climate is good enough, so we're not going to do anything. And we didn't. I mean, frustratingly, we did nothing. And I mean, to the extent of flipping tables and shouting matches, nothing got accomplished. And then that was my last active duty trip because I was so disgruntled at what was going on politically that was affecting us.
And is that when you left military service because you had that, like you said, you were disgruntled, you were upset about the way, I mean, I felt like that to a degree, even just with our rules of combat when I was in Iraq in 2005, which is different than what you're talking about here. But I felt like, you know, we as an artillery unit had the capabilities to do some real damage. And yet we were hamstringed deliberately and intentionally, whether that was malicious or just incompetence like we're talking about now. The fact of the matter is, like, our capabilities are far superior than what we were able to do. And that was very frustrating for me personally.
Yeah. I mean, I left the military with not a lot of good things to say about the military at that point. My chain of command was weak. The lieutenant colonel I was with in Libya was a drunk. The political situation under Obama and specifically Hillary Clinton weren't allowing us to do our job, or Special Operations Command to do our job. And I left because of that. I mean, I could have stayed in and had a very lucrative, successful story in the military, but the political situation was affecting me for the first time operationally. And I didn't want to deal with that because I was making promises to my guys that I couldn't keep. You know, I told my guys, hey man, my job is to get you to war. My job is to get you into combat and to get you the mission. And I fought like hell to get that done, but I couldn't keep that promise. And after a lot of reflection on that experience, a lot of it obviously is out of my hands. When policy dictates intelligence communities' priorities, then obviously it's going to shift tactical focus or operational focus. And we were left, you know, with low-hanging fruit. We couldn't do anything essentially. I mean, I couldn't even do a route reconnaissance in that area of operation. And this is post we just lost 4 Americans. After congressionally, I was in charge of a 1208 program, like appointed 1208 program to go create a counterterrorism force to kill Al Qaeda in Libya. Like that's my entire job. Like I got the Warno, actually got the Warno prior. We were already thinking about it prior to 9/11 of 2012. And then that happened, which to me is like the execution criteria. And we did nothing. I mean, it's pretty sad.
When you say you wanted to get your guys into the fight or into combat or into the battle, I can't remember the exact term you used. What you're saying is get off the sidelines and actually get into battle and make effective change. But you felt hamstringed by your ability to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure, man. But my goal as a leader in special operations, even when I was a cell leader, a sniper cell leader, a team sergeant, sergeant major, is to get guys in the fight. I mean, I'm the conduit between all this political crap and then streamlining the processes to get them to do their job and to insulate them from all the BS above them. I did that very well, but not being able to do anything operationally was just unacceptable for me. My whole theory philosophically was if there's no fight to be fought, I'm not going to be there. I mean, I could have better use of my time. And so I migrated over to the CIA.
Well, I mean, not only the CIA, and we can get into that, and I want to talk with you about that, but I think one thing that you've done very well, and this translates into something that I've heard a lot of people talk about, even with me and other people, is like, well, why don't you get into politics? And it's like, that's one avenue. I'm not saying that's not an avenue. Just like our military fighting force isn't an avenue, it is. But one thing I've seen you do is take your experience and your expertise and your knowledge and your connections and then translate that over to the civilian sector with American Contingency and Fieldcraft survival. And so I've seen you not look at that as a waste, because I know a lot of guys who have been in the military who are completely disgruntled to the point where they basically are self-sabotaging right now because they won't even function in the civilian sector. And that isn't you. Like, you've taken all this knowledge and experience and expertise and you've translated it over into the civilian sector to help a lot of people get into a better position. So I commend you for that.
No, I mean, that means a lot. I mean, my philosophy on all of this is, one, if you're an entrepreneur, you could have the most profound impacts on culture, um, very much so outperforming and outweighing government entities in one single position. I mean, Evan and I and all the guys were in some small circles of politicians who, like Dan Crenshaw, who, yeah, he'll get up and he'll shout and he'll do his thing and he'll profess his constituents' points of view, but he's limited. He's very limited. So yeah, sure, I could run for Senate. I could be a congressman in my area in Utah. But what is that accomplishing on a broader stage? My ideology in this is, if I could affect the masses and being better informed, best informed, to make better decisions, even in specifically who to vote for, then that's a more profound impact in shifting culture. Because we have to, I take on the responsibility of training, mentoring, and building the next generations of warriors to be able to fight in the future wars of America to preserve this thing called freedom. If we forget about that, I mean, based on the path that we're projected, we are going to be the weakest country on the planet. It won't take long before that happens. So just like John Plaster, John Stryker Meyer, all of these veterans of foreign wars from the past have written books, have got out there on the world stage and said, hey, this is a thing, which inspired me to serve. I want to do the same. And I also want to inspire men, whether they're young men or older men, to inspire. Service isn't just a military contract. It's serving your family. It's serving your community. It's serving your sons and daughters, because that's the future of our country. And I think that is what I focus most of my attention on, outside of preparedness and influencing.
Well, and I believe, I think our missions are very much aligned, which is why partially the reason I wanted to have this conversation. But I think if you can serve your daughters and you can serve your sons and you can teach them the right ways, then the service to nation and service to country and our ability to defend and uphold our liberty and freedom, that's kind of a natural byproduct of having high caliber human beings who happen to be your neighbors or happen to be the guy that you just hired for your company. Like, to me, that's like you said, that's a greater mission. And then the rest of it is just trickle down. All that stuff will take care of it if we can focus on the individual, even at a neighborhood or community level.
Yeah, that's the most important, man. That's what we've lost over the past couple decades. It probably started on September 13th of 2001, the digression of that. I mean, September 11th happened. September 12th, we were patriotic. September 13th, it was just downhill from there. Mm-hmm. And I think the degradation of the family unit, of churches in our communities, of culture tied to, I mean, you can call it Christian values. I call it Christian values, has kind of digressed us away from these paths of just being squared away. I mean, people have asked me, like, why do you go to Utah? Or why did you guys settle in Utah? Because I like the Mormon community. I'm a Christian non-denominational. I don't believe that you need to have a specific house if you have a specific reason why you believe in God. But I love the faith of the Mormon church and, the Latter-day Saints, because when you look at the Mormon church, they have conservative values. They're still instilling those values in their churches, in their communities. And it's a fabric that has held them together, with 61% of the population in Utah. Now, am I an advocate for pushing specific lines of faith? No, but I'm an advocate for pushing specific lines of value. So that value, whether it's family values or, a good man in the household or a good woman in the household, those are things that we need to get back to.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because I happen to be LDS myself. I'm from Utah. I'm from Southern Utah. I know you're up in the Heber area,
Awesome.
which is obviously further north. And I was converted when I was 16 years old. And a lot of people ask me, they say things like, like, why did you become a member, and what's your belief and what's your testimony? And I wish I had something more spiritual, but honestly, my testimony is actually very similar to yours, which is, hey, I looked at, even at 16 years old, I looked at the guys I was playing football with. I looked at their families. I looked at their dad. I looked at their mom. I looked at their values. I looked at what they were experiencing and how happy and fulfilled they were. And I thought, that's got to be good. Like, I don't know about the spirit at 16 years old. I don't know about the spiritual side of it, but like that felt pretty good. And that was something that I wanted personally of my own life. So I'm really glad that you're talking about values and letting that dictate the decisions that you make versus ideology or, what you're supposed to believe or whatever. And just looking at the core values of a people or a family or a society or a business or whatever.
Yeah. The value system, growing up, I grew up a Baptist in North Carolina, and, I was navigating in my own head kind of what faith meant to me, what values meant to me. And I had a dad that didn't deliberately instill values into me, but he was a military man. And then I went to the Army at 17 and got issued that dog tag that says, loyalty, duty, honor, selfless service, and respect. And I paid attention. And those values that were instilled in me in the military, I realized aren't common to all. It's not an SOP that exists in most communities and most households. So I'm a big fan of instilling values in any way possible, even if that's by leading by example in my own way. I mean, people who know me in my company, people who are in my inner circle, understand the person I am, so I don't have to pretend to be something I'm not. And I hope that translates, because I mean, that's who I am. I don't have scripts and plans when I do content or when I profess about anything. It's just the way I navigate my life organically. And I hope that has some kind of impact somewhere.
So let me just get the timeline here. So you were in the military and then you went into the CIA, and then you left. And at that point you started into your entrepreneurial pursuits, or was there some sort of transition there? Like what did that actually look like? And was it American Contingency, or was it Fieldcraft Survival? Like, give me the timeline of how that broke down.
Yeah. So I joined the Army at 17 in 1997. And then in 2013, I got off active duty and transitioned my time into the reserve component. So I was a master. I had finished my team sergeant time, transferred into the 19th Special Forces Group, took another team, made sergeant major there, and then started working for the CIA in 2013. So from 2014, 15, and 16, I was basically a sergeant major in 19th Group, and then I was going overseas with the agency. And so in 2016, in Pakistan specifically, I decided I wanted, at that point I hadn't had a family, and I wanted to kind of focus on anchoring myself into something, and felt like I had enough experience to start a business. So I started Fieldcraft Survival in 2015, and then executed it in 2016. The first couple of years, I actually won a contract for as a program manager for teaching the King of Malaysia's bodyguards, who happened to be Navy SEALs and SF guys. So I did that for a year or two.
That sounds like some sort of weird email that I'd get about, like, like, here, I'm going to gift you $20 million or whatever. You just got to like send me an email back and give me your bank account information. The King of Malaysia.
It felt like that. Well, it's funny because I mean, the king of Malaysia, we're not close now, but he was like a good buddy. The king of Malaysia
Interesting.
um, went to sniper schools, civilian sniper schools in America. Had a condo in San Diego. Was an avid hunter. He used to archery hunt for elk.
Really?
Yeah, so he was a sultan, so of a province, and then in the monarchy in Malaysia, it rotates through provinces. So it rotated into his province, and he was just living that prince life, kind of doing his thing. And his province got the rotation for, I think it's 5 years. And his dad passed away, and his brother didn't want it. So he was next. So he went from like this playboy kind of hanging out, hunting.
I was gonna say, I'd much rather be a prince than a king, for sure. You got all the money, all the benefits, all the ladies, all the whatever, and none of the responsibilities.
Yeah, he got appointed, and then the first thing he started doing was going, hey man, I don't want like cops to protect me, even though cops that are there that are in protection are squared away. He wanted to train his special operations guys and make them his PSD. And so we did that. And it was really fun, really cool. That lasted a couple of years. So officially, I mean, technically I've been in business for about 3 years. We're wrapping up our third solid year of business at Fieldcraft Survival.
I'm going to get into that, but can you pull back any of the mystery or the cloak of the CIA? Like most of us, what we see is the movies and like all this kind of weird stuff, and like how much of that is true versus how much of it was business as usual as a military member. Like help us like see a little bit of a glimpse into what that transition looked like into the CIA.
Yeah, here's what I'll say about the agency. And on as a military special operations guy, especially as a senior guy, I've worked with the CIA a lot downrange. I mean, I shared a program with the CIA overseas, so I kind of understood where they were coming from and some of the things that I liked about the CIA. One, the CIA runs everything. I mean, if you're a special operations guy and you want to play ball, you understand that the chief of mission or the chief of base in a specific location runs all the intelligence priorities. Two, operationally, they do things that are more significant when tied to national security. I mean, it's big level, it's high level things, and that trickles down to some really cool opportunities for guys like myself. And I've never been treated so good in an organization. The best food, the best accommodations, the best travel, the best people. One thing I'll say about the CIA is they truly know, especially in the operational sector, which is the Directorate of Operations, and also the Office of Security, which I work for. They know how to recruit, assess, and train the right people. I don't think I really met, I mean, in the State Department, military, and every organization I've worked with or for, I've identified a lot of people that shouldn't have been there. In the CIA, I don't think I ever ran across a guy that I didn't, in GRS, which is where I worked. I never ran across a guy that I was uncomfortable with operating with, because I knew they were called. I knew they were vetted. I knew they were a high caliber operator, professional. And man, it was the greatest experience I've ever had. Honestly, I think the CIA is the best job I've ever had in the short stint that I had it. But those guys and gals that work for the CIA are the hardest working human beings I've ever seen. I mean, in special operations, I would say probably about 20% of special operations really take their job seriously and grind, like are grinders.
Sure.
And I would in that category because I lived, I mean, as a child, that's all I wanted to be. So when I was there, my sole focus wasn't bars, wasn't women, was killing bad guys. Well, I didn't think that existed anywhere else, and except for, tiered units. And then I went to CIA, and the entire organization thinks like that. And so those guys get put on TDY, and they're in Yemen for a year. And I'm like, I don't know if I could live in Yemen for a year. 60 days is enough for me. I get to go home for 60 days. And then those guys and gals are there for years. And it was truly and I don't even have any affiliate. I got a few affiliations with the agency, with friends and programs, but it was the best organization I've ever worked for.
You use the term they, and I'm very cautious about that, because it's easy to say, oh, they want this, they want that. And it's like, well, who is they? I don't know. It's just some entity out there. Like, who is they? From my perspective and from my limited experience, when I see the military, I see intelligence agencies, it seems to me that a lot of these agencies and organizations are going more woke than maybe they have in the past. And to a degree, again, this is my maybe own ignorance speaking, seems to be infiltrated to some degree with leftist ideology, with a level of wokeness. Would you agree? Would you disagree? Like, is they your brothers and sisters in arms? Is it some separate entity that's dictating and pulling the strings? What does that actually look like?
No, I would say that is a thing. I mean, I noticed that, especially in diplomatic service, especially in the State Department, foreign service. One, they recruit from Ivy League liberal colleges. I mean, that's where they recruit them from. And then what you'll see in areas
let me interrupt you, Mike, real quick. These are more of your intellects versus operators. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So, I mean, remember the CIA is an intel or intelligence collection apparatus. So their priorities are collecting information, and some of the best and brightest aren't operational guys. They're people who know how to have conversations. They speak 4 languages. They could write a cable like they're writing a Stephen King novel. So that articulation of information is very specific and pointed. It has to be for the sake of dissemination, proper dissemination of intelligence. So those people, often when they're not in the war zone, or we'll call it semi-permissive or non-permissive environments, they're likely to be woke. But when they come to the war zone, they work with GRS, they work with Special Activities Division, they start to realize, like, wow, this is not what my professor said to me in 4 years of school. This is completely different. And so they become woke to a new reality, a worldly perspective. And so that translates often into the right actors in the right positions. And what you'll see is operational elements like the Directorate of Operations, or CTC, the Counterterrorism Center, or Ground Branch or Air Branch or Maritime Branch, is those guys now are become senior leaders that have 20 years of GWAT, and then they're in charge of bases. And then that ideology from that leader is affecting their case officers who have the big 1,000-pound brains out of an Ivy League college. And they're going, okay, now I'm shifting my ideas, and it becomes better. But
why does it seem to be shifting? And again, this is me just seeing it from the outside looking in. It seems to me to be shifting more left than right in the ideology. Is that incorrect?
No. So if you take the center, of Northern Virginia or Washington, D.C., where the flagpole is, you could build out rings, right? And if you're talking about a covert base or a base of operations in Africa, you're likely not to have that kind of ideology, because they're in real time dealing with real world problems. And what you'll see is, philosophically, you'll see more radical thoughts and ideas, culture, and effects on people based on their absence from this reality. And I saw that. I was in Libya, and I had a State Department logistics expert tell me he wasn't going to support me. So this is post 9/11. This is October of 2012. And I needed vehicles to transport men, weapons, and equipment from the airport to our base to support this counterterrorism unit I was standing up. That, by the way, had a secondary mission of force protection for the embassy. So if shit hit the fan, it would be me, 3 of my guys, and my Libyan counterterrorism force to come respond and react to support the embassy. I said, hey, I need some vehicles. And he had 100 vehicles. And he goes, I'm not giving you vehicles. And I said, what do you mean you're not giving me vehicles? He goes, well, I don't have to support you. I said, I'm an American senior enlisted advisor for the State Department and for the embassy of Libya. I'm running a counterterrorism program that's sanctioned by your chief of mission, your ambassador, who was the charge, Alexander Pope. And you're telling me logistically, I'm asking for vehicles. You can't support me or you won't support me. And he goes, I won't support you. And I said, let me tell you something. If this base gets attacked, I will lock your ass in this room and I'll let Al Qaeda chop off your effing head. And I quietly said that. And I told him, I said, dude, you have no idea the list that you've made. I said, I will crush you. And I just walked out. And that was the start point of an October rotation all the way into the following year of similar frustrations.
Were there political like what would be the reasoning behind that? Is it political? Is it vengeance? I'm gonna get back at you, or like what is it?
Radical leftist. He was a radical, fanatical leftist. He hated the military. He hated everything we stood for. He didn't want it, just being in uniform. He would scowl at us. After I told him I would break him in half, he stopped leaving his room because he knew he would run into me. It was insanity because, like, I can't even fathom even a ideology that I don't agree with doing that to another American. Doing that to another person is my field of view, but an American in an embassy, unfathomable.
Yeah, man. I can appreciate your disdain. Like, I mean, for every one story you just shared with me, there's probably, 100 stories that you could share with me. And so I could certainly appreciate the disdain between personal ideology, whether it's right or left, or political jockeying, which I'm sure is just a nightmare. When it comes down to it, we have hundreds of thousands of men and women who just actually want to do the right thing. And I look at that with Afghanistan. It's like, yeah, there's politics and there's this and there's that and there's the red tape and everything else. And there's also a lot of people who are going to die, a lot of young women and girls who are going to be raped and mutilated. And we've got hundreds of thousands of people who want to do the right thing. And it's disheartening, to say the least, that we are so hamstringed by this ideology and this political jockeying to keep people from doing that, who are well qualified like yourself to do it.
Yeah, we used to stand for this idea of policing the world, and we burden that responsibility. And then and that actually in a lot of ways was a democratic approach, especially in the 80s, 90s, and leading out into modern times. So when I see Bill Clinton and the tragedies that happened all over Africa, not just Rwanda, but all over Africa with these mass killings of people. And then you see Mogadishu, Somalia, where Rangers and members of Special Operations Command were murdered and drugged through the streets of Mogadishu, and we pull out. And then you see that, that evolves. And then you see, the Trump administration go into Syria, kill the leader of ISIS, and kill hundreds of thousands of ISIS members. Like, we forget that he did that. The reason it's not a thing is because he crushed the media and didn't allow them to be able to show and be embedded with all of the things that we were doing. And we had a whole campaign in a very short period of time, wiped ISIS off the planet. And now we're pulling out of Afghanistan, leaving a humanitarian crisis and not doing anything about it. And that's happening all over the world because of our policy. The reason that Americans are stranded, the reason that Afghans are going to get killed, tortured, murdered from here until whenever, until somebody does something about it, is because of policy. So when you flex cuff American veterans who have the operational experience, the strategic experience to do something about it, they're going to rise up and do something about it. And so it's this idea of like central government versus the people. The people are very good in free enterprises and markets at sourcing a better optimized solution. The government has shown again and again, they are not very good at anything. So I actually like the position we're put in, except not only are we getting called domestic terrorist and being federally investigated, but even more so, we're being stagnated and basically blockaded from being able to help. And that's the detriment, because a smart government would leverage the experience of the private sector, like they do in social media, like they do in free enterprise when it benefits them. They would look and go, how can we work with you to make this a better attempt and approach in rescuing these Afghans and American citizens? But they haven't done that. They just cut off every ability and access for us to do this because there's no diplomatic or no military strategy in Afghanistan. I have members of Joint Special Operations Command. I have senior buddies of mine that work for the CIA who have told me they've been directed to cut all ties to Afghanistan, including intelligence, including our eyes on the most significant actors who were just released in 5,000 terrorists that were released from Bagram, one of which just conducted the suicide attack that killed 13 service members and hundreds of Afghans. That is going to be our next problem set that we will be fighting in the near future. I don't think it's if, it's when, and it's going to happen. You got a safe haven of terrorism now.
Yeah, but and I'm saying this sarcastically, we might have over the horizon capabilities, so we don't need all of that. I mean, look, here's what it leads me to believe is that there's ulterior motives. But also, let's look at the other side of this for a minute. To what degree do we have a responsibility to be the savior of the world stage? And I'm asking that in all sincerity. I want to know both sides of that and both sides of the equation of people who believe we do have a moral obligation and those who don't believe. I'm very curious about that question. I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
So I've never been asked that, but I have very strong feelings about it. As the leaders, well, as a president who's the leader of the free world, and as somebody who's deployed 20 plus times all over the world and seen it all, it is our responsibility to assist and help the entire world. That is our responsibility. If there is a genocide of people getting murdered in a country in Africa, we should deploy Team America to go in there and kill all of those bad dudes off the face of the earth and work with the international community to build and repair that damage that was done. And we did that. People forget that we were at war with Germany, Japan, and Italy during World War II. And the lead up of World War II was millions of people dying before we stepped in. I mean, Winston Churchill bombed, I believe in 1944, a German town and killed in one night 80,000 civilians because he needed to turn the tides of war. This is, I mean, a sovereign country that is Britain, made the decision that we had to kill 80,000 plus people in an action to preserve life. We were worlds, separate worlds, and it was like we were at war. And the idea that we are going to allow terrorist organization who have already showed the capability and capacity to terrorize, to murder American citizens and free people all over the world is asinine to me. Because when you look at the analogy from my perspective is like community, it's like your own neighborhood. So if you have your house, there's a strategy. If you want to be in your home and feel safe, at least if you want to pretend that you're safe, you shut the doors, lock the doors, close the blinds, turn on TV very loud, and forget anything exists outside of your home. If you want to proactively protect your home for the long term, then you have a community watch or community service. You get outside, you do roving patrols, you do presence patrols. You look at your neighbors' homes, you look for patterns of life, you look for inconsistencies, and then you're better protected because your country is protected when you're looking at the world. It's number one, it's a strategy diplomatically. It's a strategy based on our intelligence community breakouts and operationally. So we should be doing it. And I hate to say that because I hate to say it because a lot of people don't understand how those things work when they say, screw that, we need to be focused on our own problems.
Right.
Well, we got a lot of problems, and I agree. But when we look at the national security stage in foreign policy, the best way to protect ourselves now is doing that. The detriment to that is the contrast to that is September 11th of 2001. That's what happens when you take your eye off the ball.
I think that's a very good analogy. And I don't know that it's ever been to explain to me that way of, hey, yeah, you could put the deadbolts on or put longer screws in your deadbolts or whatever it is, which you should do, by the way.
Yeah.
Or you could be proactive. And I really like that thought. But I think where a lot of people get concerned, and I've had concerns about this too, is like, are we really doing this to help out of some sort of benevolence for other people? Or is it that we want to secure our own things? Like we need oil, right? So we're going to put it under the umbrella of like liberating some people, but really it's just our own self-interest. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up. Is it benevolent intentions, or is there something more deceitful and we're just using benevolent intentions as the filter or the cover for what our real intentions are?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, but I think based on the way human beings operate anyway, you can't have one without the other. And it's already something that we do. I mean, we have tens of thousands of American troops, mostly soldiers, on the border of the demilitarized zone in Korea. Korea was fought from 1950 to 1953. Millions of people, including civilians, died during that war. Why did we fight that campaign? Well, we fought in Korea because after World War II, Japan owned Korea. So when we consolidated efforts and we were like, what are we going to do with Korea? Well, China and Russia wanted Korea. So we were like, well, we kind of own Japan. We did a contract with Japan. Now we need to own or fight for the battleground. 5 years later, we're in Korea. So we haven't left that place, by the way. We just gave up strategically Bagram Air Base located between Iran, Russia, China, and the free world, which is us. That is insanity. If you took like an average military planner and you were just playing charades with this, you would be like, man, Bagram, never going to give up Bagram. Just like we never gave up Turkey because it gives us air access to the world. It's one of the reasons we're still in Italy, in Europe. So we have to think about those things. And when I think about the fall of Afghanistan, to your point, I believe there might be, like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but why would somebody so deliberately and intentionally give up that space through these generals who are embedded with China, by the way? I mean, Milley conducted, I think, enacted he should be tried for treason. And I don't know how this isn't an issue with him communicating with a senior military leader or political leader in China. And it feels deliberate because it's so stupid. It's so dumb. It feels like it's only done on purpose.
Well, I mean, that's the only two things it could be. It's either extreme incompetence or it's extreme intentionality, and both are wrong. Well, there's one side of the argument that says, hey, well, no more endless wars. Well, nobody says we're in an endless war, even though we have a strong military presence in South Korea. Nobody says we have an endless war because we have a strong military presence in Germany. We had 2,500 or whatever, 3,000 roughly troops in Bagram in Afghanistan. Were we really in a war? We haven't lost a military member in over a year, if I understand correctly. Was that really a war, or was that just a strategic placement that we could help secure our own interest at home?
Yeah, that's why I think it just more and more seems like something intentional, because we know that. I mean, normal people don't know that. So when the narrative is spun from the politicians who are saying it's an endless war, we had to end the war was already ended.
Right.
I mean, there was no guys on the ground doing anything. We were training, assisting and advising, and most importantly, providing air assets for. Look, the campaign in Afghanistan was only fought with air assets. I mean, the Taliban, when they were fighting the Russians, were stringing up wire across ridge lines, taking down Mi-17 helicopters. So, like, you can't fight that campaign without having boots on the ground and air assets to leverage. Our boots were no longer in the front line because it was Afghan boots, and we had air assets that were protecting the Afghans that were on the ground. That's a perfect strategy. One, I think, when you look at having a place where you're constantly engaged, and you're building experience and relationships, understanding, and also holding ground, which is strategically important. There's nothing wrong with that. So if we have people in Europe since 1945, after World War II, after World War II ended, then why are we so disheartened by having a couple thousand troops and air assets in Afghanistan? And the only thing I could fathom is that it was intentional, because we pulled out August 31st, and September 1st, China does a deal with the Taliban for billions of dollars for mining their resources, including uranium deposit. The list goes on out of the Hindu Kush. That to me is like, what? And nobody's paying attention to it.
So what you're saying, I mean, that's going to happen, right? Countries are going to bid and jockey and talk and negotiate and all these things. So based on what I'm hearing you say is that our administration is deliberately and intentionally backing out of that to allow those types of negotiations to take place. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, there's no doubt politically, based on, Milley's conversation with a senior leader that happened to be Chinese. Our inability to I just got told by a clothing company recently, and I have to confirm this if this is true, but that person would know more than us as a company about international shipping and logistics, that the port in Los Angeles was bought by the Chinese. And so the shipping container woes of supply chain issues that the entire country is dealing. Raw material, surplus goods, everything is being affected. You can't get ink for printer cartridges. You can't get plastic to make goods in here because it's coming from China. And
I can't even get a t-shirt to sell on my store, let alone what you're talking about here.
All that are gone. And I go, how do you first cripple a country? Well, it starts in a campaign that's phased. One of those is propaganda, mind control, which social media has already demonstrated through its incompetency, that troll farms. I think Joe Rogan said today that the top 20,
19 or whatever it is. Yeah.
Top 20 were actually troll farms on Facebook that were affecting a messaging. I don't even know what they were doing. And that a lot of the social media woes, even with people being woke, going out to the streets, the violence and everything else, was propagated by foreign intelligence services, was enacted by troll farms in other countries, and then we were just the dummies who believed it. And now we're like in phase 2. Cut the logistical train, start controlling the demand and supply. Cut the supply, the demand will still be there, and then you can't buy stuff off the shelves. Then you'll panic. And then where did COVID-19 come from? Wuhan, China. Like, why are we not paying attention to any of this? If you're looking at a strategic way to destroy a country, we are in 3 major phases of this. What I predict is going to happen is in the next year, you will see a massive reduction of supply that will be intentionally cut off. That will be raw material from India, raw material from China, and then the players that want to play, like the Vietnams, the Malaysias, the Singapores, they don't have enough raw material. In fact, most of them are sourcing raw materials from China and other countries anyway. Mm-hmm. When that happens, the panic correlated with the continued efforts of the central government to push COVID-19 restrictions is going to put us in a social dilemma where you're going to see economic collapse, you're going to see markets in our economy collapse, and then you're going to see people panicking. because nobody's prepared. And I, like a year prior to COVID, I predicted both COVID and social discourse. I said that the two, and that's a podcast you could reference on Fieldcraft Survival that I did with Mike Pfeiffer a year prior to COVID happening. I said, right now you have social discourse because BLM at that time was a thing still, and they were burning down Baltimore. And Obama was coming forward and saying, you can't burn down Baltimore. And I said, the social media world leading people to go out and burn their own towns, speaking on behalf of Black or African Americans in their own community, and they're burning down Black business. That's like a counterintelligence home run. That stacked with a COVID-19, any kind of pandemic, is the two pieces that you need to destroy a country. And right now we're living. I mean, we're actually living it, and it won't be long.
I mean, we saw it on a micro scale with fuel, right? There was the gas craze. People, I saw videos of people putting gas in plastic grocery sacks. And then we saw it with beef too, right? There was that big cattle or beef shortage as well as a test, maybe, and maybe it wasn't intentional, but it certainly was acknowledged that this is some real stuff. If you think that was a problem, wait until it gets worse. Wait until you're without power for 2 weeks. Wait until there's no food. This is crazy stuff. So I think this is part of the reason, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but probably part of the reason that you started Fieldcraft Survival. So knowing that these things are coming down the pike, or at least anticipating that they might be, what does the average man do to deal with this? Because there's nothing we can do on a global level to shift this tide. I think if enough of us band together, we might start to make a dent. But what is it that we do to protect ourselves, our families, our neighbors, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the overall problem is our dependence. So we have a very complacent and trending dependence on everything around us. Like if we look at our phone and all of the things that we depend on our phones, if we cut that out of our lives, what are we left with? Reduced social engagement, no networks. So what I tell people is just get back to the origin stories of Americans, of what we used to be. And this wasn't 100 years ago. This was like 20 years ago. It's like 10 years ago. So when people look at their own lives, they need to start looking at infrastructure, most importantly. If they depend on water, electricity, gas, including propane, if that is what is controlling and operating their home, how can they start building reliance into that model? Well, you can get a generator, because the generator that you own can be fed by propane, it could be fed by diesel, and you could stockpile that, guaranteeing that you'll have power for an extended period of time. So when you do run out of food and you have no options, and then you got to source food, you have the ability to store it. I mean, look, I live in Utah. There's a book of preparedness based on the idea of Mormons being displaced. One, they were displaced from our country and pushed out pioneers, but they had to build reliance in that model, because now we can't depend on the American system to support us. We have to depend on ourselves. So what I would look at is developing a community of assets. That's friends and family that you could depend on to source your most impactful skill sets together. So if you're a security guy, I'm a security guy because I'm a special operations guy. I think that way. I could take that burden in a group. Then you got your homesteaders. You got people who are good at growing food. I suck at growing food. My goats just ate all my food that I spent 3 months.
Hey, you can shoot those goats if you needed to, though.
I know that they're next on the list. So when I look at sourcing experts, it's also bringing people together and going, hey, let's task organize. If something happened, how are we going to fend and take care of ourselves? I mean, the staples of survival, of shelter, of food, of water, those are basic skill sets. We need to start thinking about those things. Look, we've already saw what happens in COVID-19 when the supply chain that mostly comes out of California, which is pushing through semi-truck rigs into your local Walmart. that local Walmart on a 2-week cycle can replenish itself. In a pandemic, it's got a couple day cycle. And then what do you do when you go there and the media is accusing you? They're like, look at you guys panicking. Like I joked around with people, and I thought it was funny where people were going, look at all those idiots getting all their stuff. Well, what's the alternative? Because if you were prepared, you already did this.
Right.
And if you're making fun of the people in line, what do you have? Probably nothing. So you're either prepared and making fun of the ill-prepared, or you're not prepared making fun of the people who are doing their best. So I don't want to be there. I want you to think about it in advance. Anything that you can get, because I don't like to say, go out, buy 10 acres in the middle of nowhere and start your homestead. That's my personal desire, but most people can't do that.
I mean, that's what I did. So I'm up here in rural Maine. We got 50 acres and there's like 4,000 people in this area, and that's it. So that's what I did. When you said maybe not do that, I'm like, that's what I did. And that's a beautiful thing.
I shouldn't even say that, because then a whole bunch of people will flux to Maine. Maine's a little hidden gem, man.
You got to survive the winter. That's the beautiful thing about here is we got 7 months of winter, and I've got like my flannel on right now because I'm cold as shit. But I'd rather deal with this cold a little bit for 6 or 7 months and keep people out of here because they can't deal with it.
I like that. I like that idea. And Maine's got great soil. You can grow great orchards and grow a lot of good food. I want people just to be more dependent. Like if somebody asks me, like, Mike, what can I do right now? Consolidate debt, get rid of debt, consolidate your debt, get rid of it, start focusing on redistributing your assets. So if you got a fancy car that you drive a couple days a year, sell that damn car and then start looking at resourcing land and building your infrastructure. We break down the pillars into advancing yourself, advancing your mobility capability, which is, snowmobiles, bikes, cars, etc., and then advancing your homestead. Yeah, man, that's a good start point. I know that's a lot of stuff, but it's a good start point.
I mean, it's a lot of stuff, but the beauty of what we're talking about here is, we could probably talk for 5 or 6 hours, but also you've got all the resources available, and the power of what we're doing is like, we can introduce hundreds of thousands of men to these concepts, and they get a little taste of it with what we're doing here in this conversation. And then guys, the resources are available. So if you're like, hey, I need to dive into how to pay off debt, or I need to know more about homesteading, then Mike's your guy. Like, he's got a bunch of valuable information, including how to build a community. I've got a neighbor here who I work very, very closely with. He does favors for me. I do favors for him, and we don't keep score and we don't keep track, but I know if shit hits the fan, he's going to take care of us to a degree, and vice versa. He can rely upon me for that. So there's also the power of banding together with other people in your community and serving those individuals.
Yeah. Lastly, on that piece, I would say, if you live in a densely populated area, you're going to be the first to be affected, because what people weren't meant to do is live on top of each other, right? This is a completely different architecture. When you take people and you're trying to optimize space and you stack them. So when you take a heavily metropolitan area, one, they're swinging the vote. That's the reason that you're dealing with these political issues that are manifesting themselves into homelessness, spikes in crime, suicide, drugs, etc. But you see those problems there because of the population. So when you're fighting for the same resources that aren't advanced, like the resources aren't stacked, the resources are more rural. So you have if you could take the analogy like a skyscraper or an apartment building, that apartment building has way too many people on it. But the outlining areas where the restaurants, where the Walmarts, where all the things are, they're just getting by. When the infrastructure collapses and all those people fight and fend for the same resources, then things will turn from a natural disaster potentially into a man-made disaster where you'll be fighting and fending for your life. So if you live in those areas and you have to have a plan to bug out, because you're not bugging in. And if you have the ability to bug out. And if you have the ability, even more so, stay out. I don't want anything to do with the city. It's why I live in Heber, above Salt Lake City, because I got the high ground. Anybody coming up through this pass is going to get it, and we'll be protected up here.
That's interesting. How much do you enlist your neighbors? Because there's going to be people who believe in what you're saying to varying degrees. Do you find those men and families who believe in what you're believing, and do you help them with their food storage? Like, what is it that you personally do within your community to help shore yourself up? Frankly,
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we members dot it's members.americancontingency.com or americancontingency.com. We actually have 300 groups in America, about 50,000 members of people on their own accord who are amassing and grouping and getting to know each other, having meets, training together, breaking bread together, helping each other's families out. We don't advertise this because I don't need to advertise it and market it, because it's not about business. It's about community. We have, like, when the tropical depression, which was a Cat 4 hurricane, hit Louisiana and ripped through Alabama, we had groups deploying to help other people in groups to help their community. So look, it's like what I tell people, it's like Team Rubicon with guns. Like, we're also focused on the security, like if a group and community bands together, which is the entire point of American Contingency, which stemmed from radical leftists in this case, migrating into suburban or rural areas where people lived in their homes, kicking in their doors, walking through their yards, threatening people in neighborhoods, families, and law-abiding citizens. That when the law enforcement agencies that were taxpayer enforcing those laws didn't do anything about that, I said, well, I'll do something about it. Yeah, I'll tell people how to do something about it. It's not a radical idea. It's called protecting yourself from radical human beings who want to do you harm. And so I want people to band together in these communities, talk about security, talk about a plan of action, talk about leveraging assets, and help build that rapport that we've lost. I mean, people scowl at their neighbor for checking their physical snail mail. It's like, who's that dude? It's like, it's your neighbor. Like, right. We go into apartment complexes and we hide. It's like, oh, wait, there's somebody out there. I'll wait until they leave. Because we don't want to interact with people, because our virtual life on our cell phone is more important than our actual life in our real world.
Man, it's true. Like, I'll tell you, I've got 3 neighbors in this little area here, and they've all got keys to my house, actually. Like, awesome. They literally have keys to my house, and we went on vacation not too long ago. We asked some neighbors to take care of the place and the garden and the pets and whatnot. And then I had another neighbor who sent me a text and said, hey, Ryan, I noticed you had a few packages or a few pieces of mail on your front step. I just picked those up and I went and put them in your barn. I hope you don't mind. I'm like, hell no, I don't mind. Like, that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing for each other. But it also takes some initiative. And I just feel like a lot of people, it's frustrating, just aren't willing to take that initiative. And it's going to be our demise at some point, whether that's an intruder who tries to break into your home or something more catastrophic like we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's the whole premise behind Fieldcraft survival, which is if you don't pay attention, you'll just be a victim. And that's the sad reality of it. But if you did pay attention and you just did some things right, then you're likely and statistically not to be a victim. So all we're doing is advocating for you just to pay attention and rebuild the relationships that we used to build when we were growing up. And I think a lot of people are woke to that new reality in a good way, in a positive way. Or they won't pay attention. They'll attack us, call us preppers, call us radicals, call us extremists and paranoid people. And then they won't be prepared. It's the same people who made fun of all the people standing in line. Like I remember one assessment, this guy was making fun of all these people in line getting paper towels. And I looked at the line, I went, all those people are elderly. They're old. Mm. So they probably don't watch TV, or they do watch TV and they live alone. They don't have a lot. They don't have people to go out and get stuff for them. They don't have the ability to navigate the internet to get stuff. So they go out like normal Americans and they try to do the best with what they got. I'd rather be that person than the person who's making fun of them for being paranoid when they don't have anything stockpiled or prepared, because it's too good for them. And that's most people in America.
I think that's a good point. I mean, look, I've been guilty of that too. You see the person at the grocery store, especially last year, who had all the toilet paper, and it's like, well, that's a little wild, but okay, well, they're a little late to the party, but at least they're doing something. At least they're
Yeah,
making a good decision rather than poking at everybody else and leaving themselves exposed to what could potentially happen.
yeah. I mean, look, most Americans are just doing the best they can because they're middle America. I mean, they're blue collar people. I mean, I grew up blue collar. I grew up poor. I mean, I grew up below the poverty line. I was not middle class, and I know what that feels like when your dad's just trying to make ends meet. You're like eating ramen and hot dogs for dinner every night. Just trying to, you don't have enough money for dinner, let alone to prep a whole bunch of stuff. So what I want people to understand is, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. You just have to be conscious to it. So if that means having a conversation with your neighbor, like, hey, Chuck, look, I've never thought about this before, but I listened to this podcast and they were talking about some things, and maybe we should have a conversation of like, what happens if a hurricane rips through here, or worst case scenario, there's a riot, or there's a man-made disaster. How are we going to pull our resources? That's all I'm asking. You don't have to buy a shirt from me. You don't have to buy a kit from me. You don't have to do anything. I just want people to be better prepared, because I know one day it's likely to happen in my own backyard. And if I could advocate it, then we can get through it. I just see the writing on the wall, and I've saw it for a long time. And a lot of people with my background see it. And I'm not a dummy. I'm a student of history, and I'm also an expert in operational planning. I just want to make sure that Americans especially are taking care of themselves and each other.
Well, and to compliment you, one thing that I think you've done very well is you've become the solution to your own problem, and I think that's what you're advocating for. That we as men ought to consider what could potentially go wrong and start proposing and presenting and creating solutions to our own problems, because the likelihood of a police officer, for example, getting here in time, if somebody decides to break into my home, is diminished. It's not as good as me being able to react and respond to that appropriately, right? So we need to figure out a way to become the solutions to our own problems, and I think that's what you're advocating for. That's what you seem to be doing, and that's what your programs and your courses and your information seem to be doing as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like you are your own first response, and just own that responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility but yours.
Yeah. Well, how do we connect with you, man? If the guys are hearing this and like, okay, well, yeah, good, I'm on board. What do I need to do? Like, where do we direct them? How do we get on board and get them started?
Yeah, it's everything Fieldcraft Survival. I mean, that's our YouTube channel, which has a lot of content for free on education of how to be better prepared. It's our podcast, the Fieldcraft Survival Podcast. It's my personal podcast. It's called Mike Force, named after the quick reaction force units in Vietnam. And then Instagram's, Facebook, it's all the same, Fieldcraft. And my personal Instagram is at mike.a.glover. And I do a lot of posting about, pro tips and things that I live and think about to make people better prepared. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff. It doesn't cost you any money. It's podcasts like yours. It's YouTube videos. Maybe we'll plant the seed and then you can come train with us. It's fieldcraftsurvival.com is our website as well.
Right on, man. We'll sync it all up so the guys know where to go. Again, I appreciate you and everything that you're doing. I'm glad we finally synced up, and just got to tell you, keep up the good work. I know you're a busy man, but it seems to me you're doing the right things, and I honor and appreciate you for that. So thanks for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me. And it was a privilege and honor. And I hope to get back on the podcast. And if there's any updates or anything else, hopefully get some good feedback on this. And I appreciate what you're doing as well, because having these conversations through the myriad of professionals and guests you have is one of the best ways to learn. And I'm a fan, and I know a lot of guys are.
Thanks, brother. We'll get you back on. This is just a start.
Thanks, man.